Being an innovator or a trailblazer of any kind is never easy work, and anyone who sold you a dream to the contrary is lying. But that doesn't stop some crazy people like me, and maybe you too, from wanting to do it anyway. So I wanted to know exactly what it's like to join a rocket ship startup as their very first data hire. What's the day-to-day work like? What are the technical foundations that you have to be the one to put in place? And how do you set the stage for building a great data team and function when it's time to expand beyond yourself? I can think of no one better to answer those questions for us than my friend Josh Hanson, who did exactly this when he joined Clay, a data enrichment startup that's changing the game for thousands of go-to-market teams around the world. Let's hear what he has to say. I'm Ryan Lucht, and you're watching Outperform. All right, so let's jump straight into it. How have you enjoyed being the first data scientist at Clay, and is it a career move you'd recommend to other folks?
I've loved it. I've had no regrets, and I think it's probably my favorite job yet, and one of the best decisions I've made. And there's many reasons for that, but I also think just as important is kind of diving into the question around, is it a career move I'd recommend? Um, for me, in my specific situation, absolutely. But I can tell you all the people who shouldn't be taking jobs like that, given
Okay, yeah, let's
after
start
I've
there.
done this for a year, right? So first one I would say is, and this kind of came up the other day actually. We were talking to, we're actually recruiting right now for data scientists, and we were talking to a woman who first job out of college was first data scientist at this like high growth startup, right?
Oh, geez,
And
yeah.
it just got me kind of thinking on this topic a little bit. And like when I reflect on my first job in tech at Intercom and how important that was to me, and how valuable it was to me, that job laid the foundations for the rest of my career in a lot of ways because it was like this high growth, mid-sized startup where it was just like this perfect combination of coming in and being able to touch, every corner of the data org and have amazing people around you to teach what good looks like in all of those domains, right?
Sure.
And so like I can't imagine being the first data person. Like I'm sure the people being hired for these roles are geniuses and will absolutely figure it out. I would not recommend it for your first job, right? Just for them, like it is so valuable to have a first job be a place where you can actually learn from amazing people about everything you need to learn, which is quite a bit, right?
Right.
So that's one I would say don't do it, right? Another category of people I'd say don't do it. People uncomfortable with ambiguity, right? So
Sure.
this is a huge one. I see this all the time, like especially kind of going back to the theme of people we're interviewing right now. There's like this whole, hey, what's the reporting structure? What am I going to be working on day one? What am I going to work? What's the product roadmap? And it's just kind of like, I don't think you understand. We're talking about like this high growth startup where, you're kind of required to come in and figure out what's important and what should be done and what's going to add value, right? So if you're someone that needs to be told what to do every day and can't go figure that on yourself or figure that out by yourself and deal with that kind of ambiguity in those situations, people who actually expect to be doing like deep data science work immediately, right? So my role, I'm technically called a data scientist here at Clay, right? But I would say I'd say about 10, maybe 15% of my time has been spent in this past year doing data science, right? And that's because that first job is always going to be like building data, right? If you're the first
Sure.
data person, like your first year is just doing a lot of the basics, right? So that's starting with getting your data stack built, right? Getting everything up and running there. And then just doing the basics and the foundational stuff, right? Like building that robust, nice transformation layer, something like DBT, and then just partnering with teams and simply getting numbers in front of them that they need to be looking at, right? Like that is year one, plus a little more. There's a little more to it, but like for the most part, if you're expecting to come in and be doing some like interesting, fascinating data science stuff, like that's not your first year, right? Yeah. So those are the people I'd say shouldn't do it. Uh, People that should, um, I think people that want to build, right? I came in and I just wanted, this is like my first job where I got to build from day one and kind of grow something from zero to a data culture, right? And that's not to say that we're 100% there or anything. Like it's a very, very long journey, as all data people listening to this know. Uh, but you got to love that process, right? And understand all the steps of that different process and be okay with being in each of those steps at any given moment, right? Um, the other thing I would say is you need a lot of soft skills, right? So it's not just being an incredible data scientist. I don't care if you have a PhD in data science from Stanford or statistics, right? Like if you don't have all the soft skills to make people understand why data is valuable, right? Within that first year, because it is a lot of convincing people that what you're talking about is valuable and worth listening to, then everything you're doing is moot and void, right? And pointless, right? Um, and then lastly, I would say you just have to have a passion for data, right? Like if you think that first role as a data scientist at a high growth startup is, you know, just another 9 to 5, you're very wrong, right? And it's going to be a lot of work, and you truly have to love what you do and be passionate about every day the things you're doing, or you're going to burn out pretty fast. Right?
Yep. I'm
Yeah.
reminded of the classic startup saying that I think is true for all roles, that you're building the plane while you're flying it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always
100%.
true.
Yeah. And that's true, you know, in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, ad infinitum, right? Yeah. So, uh,
So I kind of want to go chronologically through,
mhm,
what your experience has been like, starting
totally.
from even before you joined Clay, and obviously want to talk about like what
Yep.
the actual work looks like and what's been surprising. But maybe we start before day one at the Clay office. Like, can you tell us a little bit about what you were looking for in a role and or a company
Yeah.
that was important to you? Like, what were you prioritizing when you were thinking about making this move?
Yeah, totally. I think anyone listening to this might be somewhat disappointed in my answer here, but because I think it's pretty simple. Like I think I've listened to a lot of people, a lot of my friends kind of talk about the pros and cons of jobs they're considering, and kind of getting lost in, frankly, the details that don't really matter that much, in my opinion, right? So when I think about any role, or when I was thinking about Clay specifically, like I really hone in on 3 core questions, right? That's first off, um, am I going to love what I'm doing every day, right? Am I going to be excited to wake up and do the work I'm being asked to do? Um, am I going to enjoy the people I'm doing that work with, and love working with them? And do I like and trust leadership, right?
Mm.
And in my opinion, if those 3 things are all there, um, everything else is just details, right? Like if you're 3 for 3 on those things, everything's probably going to work out. You're also in like the 99.999 percentile of people on this planet. Like how many people at their jobs get to say yes to all 3 of those things, right? So don't get lost in the details. Like don't care so much about the little details of like this specific title or that specific, I need an X% bump in salary to make this like worth, like it's just don't, right?
Speaking of trusting leadership, enjoying what you're doing every day, how much there is work wise to build from zero, like what was your impression? Did the Clay team have a really clear idea of what they needed that first data scientist role to be, like before you started the conversation? Or was it more of a collaboration to figure out, here's what a data scientist should actually be doing here long term?
Yeah, no, totally. I think for the most part it was somewhat 50-50, right? Like I think they had some ideas as to what they wanted data to do, uh, but also didn't probably know what data was going to be doing a year from now, right? And
Sure.
and that's just kind of startup stuff, right? You're trying to figure out the next few months at max, right?
Oh, across the organization, that's true.
Yeah,
Not just
across
for
your
a new role. Yeah.
exactly. So and that's totally fine, and that makes sense, and that's exactly what, like I said, most startups are in, right? And so specifically, actually, just to kind of set the context on how almost somewhat nonchalant this was too, right? It was they weren't even looking for a data person technically, like there was no job role. I actually just got introduced to Cream and Varun through an old PM from Loom actually, and he said, "Hey, like I'm advising them, and they seem like they need a data person, so you should just talk to them about data," right? And so they introduced me, started talking about data. They started describing some of the problems they're thinking about now, and honestly, they just asked me to put together like a deck explaining my first 90 days. I did that, and they were like, "Sold, let's do it." And that's how I ended up here, right?
Yeah. Were the things
Yeah.
that they needed help with immediately things that you were actually able to tackle immediately, or were
Mhm.
they things that required some more foundational work to get to?
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance, building the infrastructure that you're going to need long term with addressing like the
Yeah.
short term pains that your startup is facing?
So that was a huge part of it actually was um, I think in some ways they were kind of hoping that like I'd be able to just come in like a month and like solve that question. They had been looking at financial metrics and everything was going pretty well, but they noticed a few weaknesses, right?
Okay.
And they just wanted someone who could come in and kind of explain those weaknesses, right? Um, which is, ambiguous. It's just kind of the nature of data asks, right? Like, tell me what's going on here, right? But most importantly, what that meant for them is like they needed someone actually combining like Stripe revenue financial data with product usage data, and they just didn't have a person to do that or the tools to do that, right? And so my first task was explaining to them that the tooling had to be built first, right? Yeah, right. Getting that down, and part of that 90-day deck I was talking about was like, hey, month one, we're building this data stack. We're setting the foundations to start building what you all want and need, so that we can do stuff after we answer this initial set of questions, right? And so building that data stack, honestly, big props to what the modern data stack era, but like I had Snowflake up and running in like a day. I had our Stripe data flowing in full ETL setup via Fivetran, and like the next day, had all our product usage data in there. That one actually, that's a funny story. That actually took a while, and we can kind of talk about that one. That's a pretty good one. I think I might have the record for largest Fivetran free sync of all time, and we
Okay.
can talk about that. But actually, yeah, let's just talk about that. So basically, I got in here, right, and I was like, okay, so we need the product usage data in here, and um, basically, Clay has this very, 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 very large data set that I had no idea about, and it's like one of the most valuable product usage data sets they have, right? Um, just to give you context, like basically, Clay, you come in, you build tables, and then like you pull a list of leads and accounts of people you're trying to target for sales and marketing, right? And then you'll hit all of our enrichment providers to kind of enrich that data and add data points to kind of target your people with, right? Uh, we actually collect data on, as you might imagine, like every time someone pulls an enrichment, so we know what they're pulling. That turns out to be a lot of data points, as you might imagine, right? One one data point for every single cell in a table, right? And I wasn't 100. I was naive enough to think that like that couldn't have been that big, right? And then when I went to go put this data in there, I realized it was very, very big, and it was going to take a second. And being someone without a data engineering team, I was just kind of like, okay, how can I do this fast and free? And Fivetran has a very generous policy around their first free sync of data. So I set up. I think an engineer had the foresight to put that data in Mixpanel, and so
Yep.
I set up a sync between Mixpanel and Snowflake via Fivetran,
Uh-huh.
and I think that thing ran for, I think it was like 7 days. The initial sync was like 7 days long, just nonstop. Just like you could see, it was chunking it up and breaking it, and chunking it up and breaking, and then, but we got it in there. We did those analyses, got the information we needed. But yeah, that's a fun story. Yeah.
Fivetran has earned the shout out on the podcast today.
Yeah.
Surely.
Shout out. I love your free sync policies.
Let's talk a little bit more about the other projects you did in the first year, because I'm curious. Like, I have vague ideas, but I'm not
Yeah.
a data engineer or a data scientist. Like, what were some of the most important things that you had to put in place during that first year?
Yeah, totally. So when I think about the first year, there's a few ones that I would say are like the major milestones, right? And I mean, just getting the data stack up there and running and like actually something that we can build upon was one. But setting that aside, because that's not that interesting. I think the next big project was once I started digging into some of that financial stuff I was talking about, right? Those revenue metrics and kind of finding those signs of weakness. It was pretty clear that we needed to put some attention on like the activation side of things, right? Um, all growth teams love activation. It's just like the perfect metric. It boosts trial conversion, it boosts retention, blah blah blah, right? And so one of the biggest things I did early on was just create the activation metric and kind of dig into a great activation metric for people to start using. When I started at Clay, they had an activation metric. It was kind of your classic, just like product-y, kind of we think this is valuable kind of thing. So it's our activation metric, and that was tables exported, right? So whenever you build a table in Clay, like you export a table, and that that theoretically signifies that you've done something meaningful with your table, right? And you now deem it worth taking it somewhere else to do something with, right? Very reasonable hypothesis for a good activation metric. But when you actually dug into it, there's some really interesting trends in that. Basically, what we saw, or what I saw, was that it actually wasn't correlated with like conversion or retention at all. And in
Oh, wow.
fact, we have like this small subset of customers who um, basically come in month one, export a bunch of data, and then just leave, right? And then just get the heck out of there, right? And so our activation metric had to kind of go past that. Like sorry, you would think that you'd go past that and say like, okay, what are the meaningful signs post export? Actually, we looked up funnel and we said,
Hmm.
okay, what are the meaningful signs that you've actually built a table worth exporting, right? And a good table, right? And so did some work there, built that, had an activation metric, and then we used that for about a year. It was kind of our core activation metric for a year. And then this past December, we revisited that, and we actually have a new activation metric that I think is even better. But that's what that's how these things work.
Yeah.
With a New Year's worth of data, you kind of look back and say, does that thing still hold? It actually did. The old activation metric did, but actually, lesson learned for any of these aspiring first data people. An activation metric can be empirically valid, but very confusing and not one that like a lot of people love. Yeah, so that was kind of my first activation metric. I still say it was a very very empirically valid and very cool activation metric, but what I kind of realized with that after that first year was, people rallied around it, but by the end of the first year, there were still people that were kind of like, what is it exactly, and like how do we drive that? Like and so in December we revisited it. Now we have this very clear activation metric, this concept that everyone has kind of rallied their around, and kind of it's very clear to me now in conversation with people that like they understand exactly what they're driving towards, and
Yeah,
and what the goal is, right?
it's important.
Yeah. And then the other motion, what are some other interesting projects? Oh, I mean, one of the biggest ones was just setting up actual like financial reporting, right? So as any data person knows, who's worked with Stripe data, getting something as simple as ARR, churn, expansion, contraction numbers on like a monthly basis for any company is much, much more difficult than it should be. And so getting that set up um, was a month project or so, probably. Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, so that's one. And then, I mean, obviously, just like the core reporting for every team. So got with every team, figured out what metrics they needed to be looking at regularly, got that set up for them. And then I would say, lastly, one of the things I'm most proud of is we kind of just spun up our first actual like true growth experimentation function this past January. And so for the last quarter or so, we've been kind of growing this function, right? Growing growth, right?
Yeah.
And it's been really cool. Like I was kind of skeptical that we'd launch too many interesting experiments on too regular of a frequency, right? But I think in the last 6, 7 weeks alone, we've released 7 experiments. Um, they've all been winners, which is pretty awesome.
Wow.
Well above the win rate. And then the
Hot streak.
coolest, yeah, hot streak. And then the coolest thing I would say that is technically bad, but kind of like a fun milestone is we actually detected our first interaction effect in an experiment, which was like, wow. Like I know, there's some controversy around interaction effects, but this one did exist, and it was just like kind of cool to say that like we'd reached a place where we actually had that was a risk now, right? Like we actually had such good experiment velocity that interaction effects were a real threat, and something we
Yeah.
had to like sit down and be like, okay, actually slow down. Let's think about this for a second, right?
Way
So,
cooler to successfully detect one than to have it
yeah,
unknowingly go into the wild.
yeah. To be fair, it's much easier at our scale when you only have one or two experiments launching and not like 1,000 like you do at some of these huge companies. But so I mean, we just saw kind of like a somewhat unexpected result that looked a lot like this other experiment we were running, and I was like, let's go test this. And then sure enough, those two interacted, and like it was basically, yeah, just a classic interaction effect.
Well, also classic in that, you kind of just intuitively knew, hey, this might be an issue.
Yeah,
Wasn't like a
yeah,
huge,
yeah,
huge shock.
yeah.
I find
And
that's
it
usually the case is we can eyeball where it might be a problem.
exactly, yeah. And honestly, going into that experiment, we had discussions. We were kind of like, should we launch these two in the same week? We're pretty sure there might be something weird here, and being growth functions, you just want to show that velocity. Like we went
Sure.
made the decision to launch two, and then lesson learned. Now we only launch one on the same surface area. So yeah, so yeah,
So I have to imagine like if we were having this conversation at the very beginning, like you would have been able to predict a fair number of those projects. It's just like
yeah,
logical, we need to
yep,
stand these up things. Has there
yep,
been anything that's been particularly surprising or unexpected that you've gotten into?
yeah. I think in some ways it's actually the stuff I didn't get into that's surprising, right?
Okay.
Like
Sure.
like in the first year, I think somewhat naively, I kind of came in and was like, I'm going to figure out how to like inject analytics into every corner of the business and like drive this completely data driven company that like will not make a single decision without data somewhere in that process,
I mean,
right?
God bless the aspiration.
Yeah, yeah. God bless the aspiration. Yeah, yeah. And then I think I just, I'm sure there are much smarter people than me listening to this being like, well, duh, to what I'm about to say, but like, it just became very clear to me in the last year or so that like there's actually a lot of places where it's not that helpful to have data, right? And it's actually more about understanding where those places are and aren't. And that's really a truly valuable skill is like a foundational data person to have,
Hmm.
right? Like understand where you're actually going to add value and when you're just actually adding another cook to the kitchen, right? um, um, so yeah, I would say my most surprising thing was the stuff I didn't work on, and that's all that stuff that like, oh, actually, you're right. Like, I don't need to be here. I'm gonna go do other things over here that are more important, right?
I mean,
Um,
pretty ruthless in your prioritization.
yeah, well, that's the other thing too is like you can't be everywhere either, right? And so it really is in that first year is like a solo data person. It really is.
Yeah.
You can't be everywhere, and so I'm gonna be only in the places that really really matter, right?
Yeah. I mean, so
Yeah,
you're hiring up a team now, but like
yeah.
was there anything about the experience as the solo data person that was lonely in any way? Like did you miss having a true data team or was it just like awesome being totally autonomous and independent?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's really awesome. In some ways, it kind of sucks too. Like in overall, awesome, but there are some sucky bits, right? So I would say, kind of back to my initial point, right? Like it does it is nice to have people on your team that you can learn and grow with, right? Um, Without those people, you're figuring out things on your own, which is totally fine. But it is nice to have other smart people who understand data in your corner, right? I think just having team and like daily rituals is also something I miss, right?
Hmm.
Like that's not to say I'm not kind of working with all these other teams I'm working with. So data's kind of unique in that way, in that like even if I don't have a data team, I'm still very close with all the people I'm working with, and actually a
Adopted
lot of
onto
them.
many teams.
Exactly, yeah. So like I had my adopted families and they're awesome, like truly, truly awesome. But there is something really, really nice about just having those data teammates who you can go talk to about anything and everything that's on your mind, right? Um, so there's that. Ways it's nice. There's a lot of ways it's nice too. Um, uh, Sometimes you don't have to submit PRs to get code in the DBT. Very, very nice feature of being the only.
No
Uh,
parents.
yeah, no parents. On the flip side of that, I have YOLO'd some very bad things into Pride. So maybe that's why the process exists. I don't know. Well, actually, sorry. There's one other thing that's pretty that was pretty nice, and that is like being the person who decides what's important to work on, right? Like obviously there's all people asking me for a lot of things, and those all come into me, but being the one that gets to kind of do that prioritization and decide, hey, this is actually the thing we're doing this week, and this is why. It's very, very nice. Yeah, you don't have to go through so many layers to kind of have that conversation, right? It's just like a
Sure.
one-on-one conversation with these people who are asking for these things, which
Yep.
is very, very efficient, right?
Your YOLO comment reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from one of our founding engineers here at Eppo. I joined Eppo because Che told me I could create as much tech debt as I wanted to.
Yeah, yeah, I sympathize with that.
I guess like what do you think are your personal strengths that have helped you, not just be successful in the role, but like, make this still a great experience for you despite,
Yeah,
the challenges of being solo sometimes, or needing to do all this foundational work?
yeah, I think there's a few things. I think probably one of the more valuable traits or characteristics would be I'm just like I just love learning. And I know that's like such a cliche thing in tech now. Like it really is. Like everyone has this like growth mindset or whatever kind of bullshit. But like
If only everybody
I
did.
really, I really do like love waking up. Like I set aside like 30, 45 minutes, 60 minutes every morning to just sit and read like a new textbook or like a new paper or something. Right. And like, that's actually one of the best parts of my day. Right. And like, I just truly love the stuff and love learning about new things in it, right? So, and that's very important in these kind of roles, right? Because it's you have to be learning constantly and figuring out what new thing is going to help the business be more efficient, either within the whole data stack or new statistical method to figure out, this answer this question that people are asking. Very, very important, right? Um, Kind of similar, I think, just like passion. Like you truly, truly have to be excited about data to want to do this job. Like you truly have to love data, right? Because that works in two ways. It's the burnout thing. Like you're going to be working like this. This is a lot of work, right? And if you don't actually love what you're doing, like you're going to burn out real, real fast. But also on the flip side of things, what I've kind of noticed is that passion, like people pick up on it, right? And people trust and want to kind of follow the person that's passionate about this thing, right? That they know nothing about, right? That really goes a far way in like establishing that trust in those relationships that are so important in building that first year, right? As you establish data as an important org, right? They just know Josh sitting there in the corner, super excited about data and has like a bunch of thoughts and they're like, all right, he's gonna figure out the data stuff. We don't need to question that. Like that's gonna be fine, right? Um, and then lastly, I think just like grit, honestly, like just I've always said like I'm probably never sorry, probably is even too strong. I am never going to be the smartest guy in the room, but I would be willing to bet I'm probably going to be the hardest working in the room, honestly. And um, I think that work ethic and that like grit to keep pushing, getting better and working harder like every day is honestly what's probably explains most of how I got here, right?
Yeah.
And how I was able to do, I guess, this first year as a solo data person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, thanks so much for sharing these, I mean, pretty honest reflections, and I hope that anyone who's thinking about doing this jump to a startup gets a chance to listen to this, because that perspective from
Yeah.
someone who's now been doing it for a while is invaluable. But before I let you go, I mean, maybe this is a little veer in topic here, but I have to ask you about tools and
Yeah.
what the stack looks like, because I
Yeah.
mean, I just especially feel like you're always up on tools and stuff. So what's been
Totally.
helpful in
Yeah.
building up data at Clay and scaling yourself a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. So just to give a highlight of the data stack in general, like I think I mentioned, like it's such a cliche at this point, the modern data stack or whatever, but our stack really does feel like that. Like I set up Snowflake, right? So would recommend Snowflake to anyone, obviously. And we have all of our data flowing into Snowflake via Fivetran for like kind of our tooling data, and then Segment for all of our event instrumentation kind of things, right?
Okay.
All flowing into Snowflake. That's transformed via DBT, all that data, right? And then sent to all the places we need it to be sent, whether that be our BI layer in Sigma, um, the deep data science work we're doing in Hex, or Census. We use Census for our reverse ETL, right? And then on top of all that stuff, we have Dagster orchestrating, right? So
Okay.
amongst classic data stack, but amongst all those tools, I would say the ones that really stand out and ones I thought have been like essential as a person in year one. Obviously Epo. So like, and I say that jokingly, but also very seriously. I was just mentioning how we stood up the growth function, like starting in Q1, right? Like I have been the person to set up those experimentation functions at Intercom, Loom, ChowNow, all these other companies I've worked at. And I've learned how dumb it is to spend so much time like building those things and how inefficient it is to like just get an analysis ready for any given experiment, right? And Epo truly has allowed us to go from 0 to 1 with that kind of growth function I was talking about, right? We went from running literally 0 experiments to, I think once we decided we were doing it, I had our metric set like up there in probably a day, right? Like all the metrics we knew we were going to analyze in a day. Launched our first experiment, had results on day 1 to start monitoring, had pretty much a full picture at the end of it on day 7 as to what was happening for that first experiment and every experiment after that, right? It's been truly, and I'm not the only one saying this. Like our PM, who hasn't really done experimentation before, honestly, is obsessed with it. He like loves it. He's like, this morning he was like, this new metric, how do I get an Epo? Like I get it, I just throw the definition in and then like add the metric, right? And I was like, yeah, that's all you do. And he's like, okay, sweet, awesome. And then he literally had the metric in Epo like 2 seconds later, which is not something you could say at any other company I've worked at and kind of build experimentation for, right? So Epo's great. The other one I would say is I think truly a must for at least someone like me would be Dagster. So that like kind of crazy orchestration layer bit. I would not call myself a data engineer. Like I call myself a data generalist. Like, I kind of can handle different parts of the stack, but data engineering is definitely probably my weakest part. And Dagster is really interesting in that it's pretty easy for even like a non-data engineer to understand the framework they kind of force you to operate within for like your orchestration layer, which means like I feel confident that our orchestration layer is actually like somewhat good, right? Because I was forced to operate in these this very opinionated kind of framework that Dagster provides. So I did that, and then also, just deploying our orchestration layer was way too easy. So they have basically a serverless deploy option that's basically automated. Like I just literally told it I wanted to like deploy serverlessly, and it was like, okay, sounds great. And then, actually stepping back, like basically I made the decision to get off dbt Cloud and start orchestrating dbt with Dagster, right? I made that. I literally woke up one morning. Startups. I woke up one morning. I was like, I hate dbt Cloud. Let's turn on Dagster. Let's give it a try. Turned off dbt Cloud.
Yep.
Opened a Dagster account. Wrote like 2 lines of code to get my dbt project into Dagster. And then all of a sudden it was all completely orchestrated and running. And I was like, okay, I guess we're using Dagster now. And that's what we did. And it's much cheaper and literally 1,000 times better than anything we had in dbt Cloud. So, and it allowed us to also just build on top of that orchestration layer, right? Like dbt Cloud is very much like dbt centric, right? Whereas, Dagster, it's okay, I'm going to orchestrate my entire transformation layer with dbt, and then I'm going to build all this other cool stuff, right? Which we've done. And then, I think that's pretty much it from a must-have. Obviously, I'd recommend any of the tools I talked about, but from like a specifically first data person kind of viewpoint. Oh, Census would be the other one. Census is huge. So the reverse ETL process would be, we have partners who want to build on top of, the data models I built in dbt, right? And push those to the tools they're using, right? And so there's just really nice synergy of I build a nice dbt model, and then anyone can kind of just take it from there and get it into their system, right?
Nice.
With, basically a 1 line of SQL and pushing a few buttons in Census, right?
All right. Well,
yeah,
folks heard it here first, and we got to get Josh some sponsorship deals, apparently.
Please.
But thank you,
Dagster.
Thank you again for sitting down and kind of walking us through the journey from like consideration to the first year and beyond. I think this will be helpful for a lot of folks.
Cool. Yeah, hope it is. And yeah, this is fun. It's real fun.
So there you go. Maybe this is the career path for you. Maybe you're a builder, maybe you're a generalist, or maybe you've just been doing this for a while and you think you're ready for the challenge of running the show yourself. Whatever it may be, hopefully the insights and day in the life stories from Josh's journey at Clay over the last year and a half have been helpful to you as you're considering this career path. One thing's for sure, wherever you go and whatever you do, always be experimenting within your companies, in your career, in your life. I'm Ryan Lecht. You've been watching Outperform.